Hi, everybody. This is Mark Stoos. I am the host of Accelerating Value, a podcast that is, no surprise, focused entirely on value creation, how we can speed it up, how we can invest in it, how we can prove it, how we can protect it, all that kind of stuff, right? So we talk to all kinds of people on this podcast, not only functionally, but also varying degrees of seniority. Because you know what, everybody has a perspective on value that is worth listening to. And you can learn even from the people you don't necessarily relate to or you might even disagree with. In this particular case, the guest today is a star, right? I mean, you're gonna like really get a lot out of this particular podcast. Bob Pearson, I've known Bob for probably 10 years, right, Bob?
Yeah, going back to South by Southwest.
That's right, South by Southwest. We were both on a panel way back in the day, and so he has been a part of some really amazing value creation over the course of his career. There's a lot of stories, a lot of stuff that he can share about that, and then he's going to kind of culminate in a discussion of why he created this new agency called The Next Practice to really maximize structured value creation for clients. So that's kind of where we are, and that's where we're going. And welcome, Bob. It's great to see you again, man.
Yeah, great to be here. Always fun to talk with you, Mark.
So let's start with the first time that in your career that you sat there as a marketer or a communicator and said, I'm not sure about the value that I'm really creating, and what do I do about that? Do you remember that moment?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, there's a couple examples early in my career, but one of them was we were launching Voltaren. When I was at Ciba-Geigy, it was going to be the 13th non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug to be launched in the U.S. And the marketers wanted it to be number one right away, which is kind of unrealistic. And they kept pushing us, and we finally realized we had to be doing something different. The normal campaign wouldn't work, which led to me going out to Joplin, Missouri, and finding Mickey Mantle and convincing him to join our clinical trial and then become our spokesperson, as well as Wadey Ford. Well, when we launched the drug, everyone knew that it was Mickey Mantle's drug, and within 6 months we went to number 2 in the market. And that was one of those things in my life where I said, I think we're doing the right thing. It feels like it, but I don't know. And then when we launch and that happens, you're like, okay, got it. There's a power greater than us that can shape markets. And the question is, how do you find that? And that like you go on a search the rest of your life trying to figure out how to unlock these pieces of value. I know that's something you spend a lot of time on yourself as well, as we're always looking at what are those little pieces of value that could maybe be big, maybe not, but we're always experimenting.
Yeah, no, and so much of it too is, particularly if your business is value creation, and in a sense that's true for everybody, right? After a while, you don't want it to be serendipity.
No.
You want to be able to call the ball, right? You want to be able to know that certain things are going to, generally speaking, have a very valuable outcome, and then you want to know about how long it's going to take for that to happen.
Yes, and that's the blessing we have in 2021 versus going way back. But we always knew it, is the more quantitative you can get, the more likely you are to not guess. And the more precise we can get, the more, just our chances are better, right? If you go to 2021, I mean, my goodness, we can see exactly what the audience wants. We can see who's shaping them. All the clues are right in front of us. So it's a different challenge. It's like, how do you take all that information and then get creative enough to convince them to move in a certain direction, right? And that's our 2021 problem versus the Mickey Mantle problem of years ago.
No, you're right. I mean, and I think particularly in situations where there's a lot of volatility and where change is happening at a really rapid rate, high velocity change, where what worked in 2018 and 2019 didn't work in 2020 and may or may not work again in 2021, right?
Yeah.
How do you calibrate that? Because it's not that your experience with value creation doesn't matter anymore. It really does. And the data, the historical data still matters a lot. But there's going to be that standard deviation, right? And if you don't know what that is, you got a problem.
Well, and you raise it's a fascinating point, because when you think of timing, it's very easy today to say, oh, you have to be real time. Well, for certain things, being real time does make sense. But a lot of times, if you're trying to shape a market, like the doctors in a market aren't going away. The nurses aren't going away. So you have actually lots of time to shape them. The question is, how long does it take to shape behavior?
Absolutely.
How do you know it's occurring? And how do you know, quite frankly, when you're failing? Right? So that's a different question. You and I might say, well, it's 3 months. And if we can't get there in 3 months, we've got to figure out how to redo our mix or our campaign. Or we're seeing progress, but not enough. But if we focus a different way, we can go. So the market, I think, really guides us towards the right timing, as opposed to us just making up the timing and saying, well, it has to be quick, or it has to be this, or that's just finger in the air stuff.
Totally. I think that is broadly applicable, but it's a core problem for startups, right?
Yes.
Because, for example, if you've taken VC money, there's an expectation there around a hockey stick, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that it won't be a long time lag; it'll be a shorter time lag. But one of the things that you learn a lot in the analytics side of all this is that actually we don't control most of the equation.
Mm.
Now, what's really important to say about that too is that that's the reason why it's so important to do the part that you control really, really well. But there's a whole part of this that is outside, of our control, and it not just with customers. There's market forces. There's all kinds of stuff going on, right? And so it's a very, very interesting situation for startups, because typically, they have a certain amount of cash and there's a certain amount of burn rate, and can you last long enough to pass through the looking glass into, the wonderland?
Well, you and I both know this, and we started the next practice in July of 2020, right in the middle of COVID. It takes a lot of internal courage to say, "Hey, it's time. Let's go do it." And you get a lot of folks saying, "Go get them. You're going to do great," but deep down inside, you're thinking, "I hope so."
Right.
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 Yeah.
Very true. Yeah.
And then from there, it really is like the clock analogy you give is a good one. I think every day is an important day when you're an entrepreneur. So you're thinking like, did I get enough done? And I like to do something that we call the 3 and 3 planning. Always look out 3 years. Always plan for 3 months. So you always know that the decisions you make each day in a quarter are getting you to that 3-year vision, and it keeps you from going off the rails. Because I think what can happen when you're an entrepreneur is it's easy to get busy. It's hard to keep away the noise, so you stay focused, in building the business and building the product and the offering and the pricing, and as you know, all the things that go into that. So many things go on that most people don't know because they haven't done it.
Right. That's right. That's right. It's actually interesting too, because this is where the communication issue, I think, between startups and customers can be really, really pivotal, because most customers, particularly in the enterprise B2B, right? Most customers have never been in a startup.
Right.
So they're not thinking about this at all in terms of the timeline, right? And kind of almost, so like initially with Proof, right? This is now like 3-4 years ago, that we had a couple of early customers that saw themselves as both customers and sponsors.
Right.
Right. And there was a high degree of ownership in other ways other than I'm a customer and I'm paying you X amount of dollars a year, right? And it was those customers that really made a difference because they said, you know what, this is really cool. And you and I both know that I can screw around on making a decision, but I'm not going to do that because I'm really intrigued and I want to be in the middle of this. And so I'm going to act now, right?
Yeah.
And the value of that from a timing perspective, right, from a cash flow perspective, can be immense. And then also from a branding and credibility standpoint, it can be even more immense, right? It plays forward.
Well, you and I both know we've both been on the client side for many years too, and
yeah,
you do. I mean, I certainly was like this. You're always looking for that edge, and when you see a company that can provide it to you, you go work with them. And so, it's interesting when we're startups. People always talk about strategic investors, and those are very important. But you do need strategic clients. Absolutely. Who are just like you said, who see this as like, I'm going to get an edge. This is worth it. And they're willing to, believe that you're going to get there. And I think, in general, I'd say that you and I are pretty good at not disappointing them either.
Yeah, right. And that's where every day is important, as you said, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. But that's what you do think about, because this comes down to client service. If you're making a commitment, you got to come through. You got to exceed expectations. Like you're grinding on that to make sure that happens. And I think that's, what a great forcing mechanism to say, I got to go quicker to get this done. This piece of software has to get done quicker. This, it's always never fast enough, but I think you got to temper that too with, everyone works at their own pace, right? So, that's where that 3-year vision comes in to say, okay, maybe didn't get as much done this week as I thought, but it's still going in the right direction. We're still going over here to the North Star. We're good,
Right. Absolutely. So one of the things that this kind of brings up that's, I think, really interesting, in the context of business and in the context of marketing and in the context of running an agency, is that there's certainly the ability to create moments of value, right? But then there is the idea of sustained
yes.
value.
Big one.
Right? How do you think about that these days in the context of what you're doing with Next Practice?
Well, you're hitting at the key point of why we created the Next Practice. And so I have a lot of respect for the firms I've worked at and the firms, we compete against. So it's not a negative to them, but what I do see in the industry is there's too many earnouts. I think when earnouts, people are staring at the calendar, waiting for when they get out. And too often people don't have enough, skin in the game. So what we did is we said, okay, let's build a model that tries to do the best of all that. And so we have a 51-49 model in that we will never own more than 51% of a company, because we want the founders coming to work every day thinking that they can create more value. It's still on them. They have to go full speed. So that's one part. The other part is, what I've learned is, if you're building, search over here and digital marketing here and analytics here, if you're trying to do it all together, it's very tough to do. But if you actually have individual groups that can really perfect their offering, and you're integrating that offering, you can build it much faster and much better. And so that's what led to the Next Practice. We have 8 companies in the Next Practice, and each is building up their area of expertise. Each already integrates with each other as appropriate. And the amount of entrepreneurialism is through the roof. So, we're going to, in our first year, we'll probably do 23 million total. There's not a lot of companies that could say that for the first full year. But that's a testimony to the entrepreneurs and the clients that they work with. It's less to do, what I like is it's less to do with me, and it's more to do with how do you unlock people. That's why we also decided our icon would be a key, because what we're really doing is we're unlocking people, but we're also unlocking our brains to say, whatever you did before could be better. If you did search that way before, it could be better. If you did earned media before like that, it's got to be better. And so that ability to look at what's next every day it changes things.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're doing.
So let's talk about this from a couple of more vectors, right? So this model. So from a client perspective, right? So talk to me a little bit about how that model works.
Yeah.
And,
Give you a great example.
Delivers differentiated, sustained value for clients in ways that a lot of other agencies don't.
Yeah, so a couple of examples. One is Johns Hopkins University is a client of ours, and they're funded by, in this case, Johns Hopkins and the Department of Defense, and 2 COVID-19 clinical trials focused on convalescent plasma. Brilliant people at Johns Hopkins, really amazing scientists and clinicians, but they weren't enrolling patients for the trials. It just wasn't happening. And so when we came in, what we did is we didn't do the traditional approach. We used analytics to say, where are the people that we actually want to reach? What are the levers to reach them? Which media should we use first? Should we start with paid or earned or shared or owned or some combo? And each combo changes by which city you're in, And so in doing that, we could figure out what works. So we could see in 24 hours or less, is this working? Is Facebook driving in people? Is Google driving in people? Is it something else? And that has led us to now that the studies are right on track to finish. The other thing too is we found that we could reach more diverse people. Because it's always been a problem in clinical trials. Are you getting enough people who are of color, or who maybe are poor, or people that wouldn't traditionally go into a trial at the same pace? And we're able to calibrate with analytics and then figure out how to reach people and drive those numbers as well. We're very proud of that. So that's one example. I think another one would be early in COVID, we do some work with Crayola for face masks. And so, if you think about the early days of COVID, the idea of wearing a face mask wasn't so cool. And so we were introducing how you could have different colors for each day. So parents could actually have a different one for their kids each day and know which one was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And it took off. But that was understanding like how to actually package what Crayola wanted to accomplish with what people needed at the parental level and then market it correctly. And again, we don't care if paid's working or earned or shared or owned, irrelevant to us as long as it's getting it to the right place.
Absolutely. How do you see this right now in terms of the way that you compete?
Yes.
Like, do you compete actually with other agencies, or are you so differentiated that you're kind of a party of one, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of clients where there's no pitch at all. I would say the majority of our assignments are not a pitch involved. But of course, some companies, as you know, always have to have.
They're going to do it anyway.
Right?
Yeah. Right.
Doesn't matter what they think of you. You're still going to go against 3 or 4 or 5 firms, right? So we do pretty well there as well. I think the key thing is not trying to swallow the ocean and figure out what problem can we solve with the client first. I've always believed that. It's like the size of the assignment is not relevant. It's are we coming in as a strategic partner that can solve problems? And if we come in that way, we're good, because that's using the best of us. I think, being an ex-client, one of the worst things that you can do is commoditize your firm and just say, I need you to do this, just go do this. What you really want to do is say, hey, I wonder how smart Mark is, or Sally or Frank, and unlock your firm. And so we try to get that across to our clients as well, as throw anything at us, and we'll probably come back with a good answer, whether or not we're the ones who can do it.
When you think, how does this translate into like your compensation model as an agency?
So yeah, that's another one where we do not have high salaries. So we have, in fact, we have a cap on comp. I am not the highest paid person in the network on purpose. And why do we do that? We do that because we want people who believe that, hey, if we have a great outcome for the year and we're profitable, everyone's going to do fine, right? But we don't want people coming in saying, oh, I need X, Y, and Z, and I need a car, I need this. And the people who come in with lots of needs are forgetting that the real need is the client and the value that we provide to them. And that's what I want people talking about. You know, we can handle the other stuff later on. And that's, I think that just attracts a different kind of person. I think agencies have gotten too aggressive in competing at, you know, we'll give you the world financially. It's like, well, I don't know. How about coming in and getting results? Yeah.
Right. It also tends to play against the idea of sustainable value creation, right? Because people go for, you know, these really big short-term, you know, performance outcomes and kind of ride that.
Yes.
You know,
Well, this is also why, you know, we have the model we have at the 5149 is never getting to any higher than that. Is, you know, if we need to get people together on a Saturday to talk about an opportunity, we do. Like, we don't try to do that on purpose every Saturday, but everyone understands, like, we're here to just win, and winning means nailing it for the client, you know. So that's not 9 to 5. That's as needed, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. How does it translate into the way you charge clients? Have you thought?
Yeah,
is that kind of part of the revolution here?
I think it's. I don't think there's one way. I think you want to be valued. You want to do value pricing whenever possible, right? And really, I've always believed that if something costs $100,000 and that's a fair price, it's not really relevant or shouldn't be to a client if it takes us $120,000 a time or $80,000 a time, as long as we do a fantastic job. I think when we push people towards hourly rates, it can still work just fine, but all we do is count. We're just worried about how many hours and does it fit the budget, and
Right.
to me those are not behaviors that are related to creating value.
Right.
You know, so that's where I tend to focus is anytime that you can make it more value oriented, you're going to get better results for the client, and it's a healthier way to run a business, when possible.
So a model that I have had a number of conversations about. I'd love to hear what you think of it, because it sort of is a riff on something that exists already on the client side, right? In terms of particularly the way senior executives are compensated. So there's this idea that there's your base, there's the fee, right? That basically acknowledges the fact that it takes something to mount this service, right? There is short-term performance-based comp, which is really, about meeting certain KPIs, right? And then there's long cycle performance-based comp, which is really about value creation.
Right.
Right. And obviously there's a measurement and analytics component to all this as well. But it kind of has so Deloitte is starting to do this on the change management side of things. And they're really seeing a lot of success with it, not only from a client happiness point of view, but also it tends to bear against really significant procurement action, right, in terms of discounts. What do you think about that? Do you feel like that is kind of like, in general terms, where things need to go, or do you feel like that there is something else? I mean, clearly what's happening right now on the consulting side is seen as no longer working.
Right.
Like the clients feel like they're taking all the risk, right? And so how do you think this is all going to go? So this is an industry.
No, it's an interesting question. First of all, before I even get to the client, I think of our own teams. And I think if we are providing people with the best career opportunities, the best chance to grow, the best chance to manage teams and to build, then we have a team that will do really well. They're going to work really hard. They're going to create great value. So that's okay. So that's that part. On the client side, it's so hard, and you know this. It's so hard to say that what any one firm does was the reason why something else happened.
Oh, yeah,
So,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because there's so many variables. So you really have to say, let's just get a fair price and let's just do exceptional work. And then I think the bigger part is the stuff that like you do at Proof, which is really looking at the mix and saying, okay, what is working and what's not working? Is email working more effectively than we thought? Or is search working more effectively than we thought? Or is this form of paid media working? And it's the ability for firms to not care and kill what they're doing immediately. That's what clients should be asking of them. Because if they can get the data that you have and say this is working and that's not, you shouldn't have to argue with the consulting firm. They should say, got it, kill that, do this, work over here, done. You know, and so that's the kind of demand that would change the game. If otherwise, what happens, as you know, is consulting firms usually just keep going as hard as they can, and then they try to prove to you that everything they did was amazing, and yet they know deep down that they probably should have stopped doing half the stuff halfway through the year.
Right.
But they didn't want to admit that because we're not giving them the environment to do that. So that's a two-way street.
Oh, it is, absolutely. I mean, I had a conversation, I have this conversation with some regularity anyway, but in particular, about 3 months ago, I had it with a CFO, and he was complaining about his marketing team and the agency expense and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And I said, well, what have you done to, you know, establish the rules of play? Right. Well, nothing. Well, then I said, well, then in fairness, you own part of this.
Right. Well, you know, Mark, I think about it too as like as a leader myself. If I'm creating an environment where it's okay to come to me and say, hey, this isn't working, and we say, okay, great, let's figure out why, learn from it, what do we do now? That's a healthy environment. But if it's like, if you say that to me and I go, well, what are you talking about? And then I'm in their grill, that's not cool. And it's the same thing with clients. Like if you have that kind of relationship, which we do with a lot of our clients, you just figure it out and you get to a great place. And I think this is where analytics is at like truth serum. Because, you know, even if we don't have it, we can all fall in love with whatever we're doing and convince ourselves. But we have to look and say, is it really working? You know, or is it adding more value to this other part of media we're doing? Yes or no?
So let's talk about this a little bit more from a cultural improvement point of view, right? So there's a need for accountability, which of course is the word that nobody really likes, right? And then there's a need for learning, a learning culture, right? The culture you were just talking about. Mm-hmm. In your own experience, how have you learned to balance those two?
Well, one of the things I always, good question. What I always say is that the best CEOs that I've been around are curious and always ask questions. So what you want is an environment where people are eager to ask questions, which means that they're eager to debate. And that has a lot to do with it. So if people feel like, you know, if you go the reverse of that, if people feel they're accountable and they're responsible, all the right words are said, there can be a lot of fear baked into that too.
Oh, sure.
And that's no good. So you need to be accountable, but then say like, you know, hey, Mark, I'm not exactly sure what you meant by this, or this is what I'm seeing here. I'm not exactly sure what that means. What do you think? You know, and that ability to be like peerless or act like peers, I guess.
Right.
At any level, that's the key. That's what I saw with a Michael Dell. That's what I saw with, you know, other execs like that, is they just always asking questions, but they're asking questions really to further the discussion and get you to see where to go. They're not just asking questions for the hell of it.
It's so true. I mean, actually, it's very similar to one of the things that we talk a lot about with regard to analytics, is that I think a lot of people see analytics as a judge in black robes.
Right.
And this is where analytics is. It's not really analytics. It's the culture. It's the way the culture uses the analytics, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, analytics really is a coach. So it helps you do better, right? You ask questions and it gives you feedback. And it's a bodyguard. because it can substantiate that the risk that you took did in fact create a lot of value.
Yeah, well, and I would add, Mark, I've always looked at it as, we say actionable insights. Is there an insight we can act on, or that we're smarter because we saw this data together? And if the answer is no, it doesn't mean the data is bad. It just means we haven't looked at it in a way yet that gives us that insight. So if you never give up on that, you're good. But as you know, we've all seen too many slides with pie charts and everything else, and we're like, okay, this is nice, but I don't know what the heck it tells me. Right?
Exactly. Totally.
So I don't need 30 of those slides. I need 0 of those slides.
Yeah, actually, at Proof, one of the big breakthrough realizations for us was nothing more nor less than the realization that for many, many people in businesses, when you flash a chart or particularly a graph, complex graph, on the screen, they immediately shut down because they immediately feel stupid.
Right.
And it doesn't have anything to do with how smart they are. This is a purely psychological kind of dynamic, right? But it is pervasive, and there's a lot of research. So after we started kind of stumbling into it, we started looking around trying to figure out if we could corroborate this. And man, there's like a ton of stuff out there on it. And so when we changed the UX, we changed the presentation away from what you're talking about into something that was very normal and accessible for most people. Wow, it was just like throwing a switch. It was really kind of interesting.
Well, you're getting at something too, where we have started putting together a book that we're doing just for ourselves in the next practice. It may eventually be a book that other people want, called What's Next. And it's basically going to be a series of one-page analyses. But, like what you're just describing there, it's like, how do you actually know that you have an insight? I mean, that's a page where you just say, okay, this is what goes into it. Yeah. How do you know when you don't? That could be another one, right? But I think we have an obligation to not only train our teams, but to kind of retrain ourselves, and then also indirectly our clients. So we all understand what we're looking for. Because I think that's what happens a lot of times with data is it's kind of like your point on the pie chart. What I'm always conscious of is when you show anything to anyone, whatever they had in their past is triggered in their brain.
Totally.
I don't want that happening. I want it to be so clear you're not thinking about something from a year ago.
Right.
And that's that. Unfortunately, people don't do that often. And then, you get into these conversations, you're like, why didn't they understand what we were saying? It's like, well, you didn't make it that clear. So.
No, it's true. I mean, actually, in my own life, I think that people that knew me in middle school and early high school have been shocked to see me become the CEO of an analytics software company, because I was known for, doing really well in history and certain kinds of sciences and English lit and all this kind of stuff, right? And algebra was not my thing, or so I thought, right? And then I had an experience at HP that they were able to kind of break through, or help me break through, and realize that this was a mental block or a psychological block, right? It wasn't about, well, Mark's just not a math person, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of us who, and I would put myself in this camp too, where, I've definitely had people say, I never had any idea you'd be as successful as you are. It's like, oh, gee, I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but thanks for sharing it. It shows what you thought. Maybe it just shows what you thought of me 30 years ago. But but I think we evolve, right? We become more curious in things. Like, I always loved math, but I was never good at calculus. But as you get older, you're like, oh, but I love algorithms. And then you just start thinking like that, and you realize you don't have to be building them. You just have to be fluent in how others do. So then you can have that conversation. This is one of the things I often will talk about with younger people, is to say, you need to play with Python, play with software, not to be a programmer, but to understand how to talk to programmers. Because you're going to be directing them, or vice versa, the rest of your life. So how they think is different than how you think, and you know this. It's like, you can have like a very linear mindset with a great programmer, and then you're over here with a creative, and it's like you got word association going on. I'm like, I'm not even sure how you put those three things together, but it seems cool.
Yeah, actually, that's so true. I mean, that was exactly the way it worked for me at Honeywell when I was CMO of Honeywell Aerospace, is that I obviously couldn't do the analytics myself. I didn't have the skill sets, right? But I knew how to communicate with a very large analytics team, and all I would say is, I really need, or someone else really needs to know this, right? The answer to this question or that question.
Yeah.
How do we do that? Right?
Well, this is something where I definitely believe this and say this often internally. Communicators and marketers who are good at what they do have this innate ability to make complex things simple. Right? I mean, we've been told this in our lives many different times. Like, how did you come up with that tagline or the headline that ran the news cycle? And it's like, I don't know. You just have the ability. It's like an artistic ability, and that really helps when you're looking at data. To just say, okay, got it. All these inputs means this. Okay, let's go do this. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. I think a lot of communicators and marketers think that they can't do this stuff well. And they're not. I don't believe it. I think they would be awesome at it if they would spend more time at it.
Absolutely. So my last question here to wrap it all up here is, and it sounds like a trick question. It's actually not, because you can go, but do you think that value is a simple idea or a complicated idea?
I think value is a complex idea because it's subjective. Right, and so it means, if you think about it, let's say we're talking client agency, you have to understand that client's business. You have to understand what they're trying to accomplish. You have to understand how they're prioritizing which things. If you can do that, then you're on the road to understanding what they see as valuable. Then you have to be over here with your team and make sure they're doing the right things that can actually impact that, because you may be doing great things, but they're not in the right order for that client. So I think it's actually, on the surface it's simple, but it's actually quite complex to provide the right value. And that's why for people or teams or firms that try to wing it and do it by intuition, good luck. Right. You'll get some of it right, but getting some of it right isn't greatness. So you have to have the right platforms in place. You have to have the right algorithms in place so you can actually get there more effectively. And that, I think, really makes a difference.
So this is actually one of the greatest lessons, that we've seen out of 2020, is that exactly what you're saying, right? That if you are looking at this as what created value before, the past is always prologue, right? In 2020, you got bit really hard, right? So in general, the companies that we work with, where they had people in there who had, they were just going to kind of like tweak 2019 for the rest of 2020, they lost big. I mean, the ratio, the kind of the 80-20 rule, sort of inverted for them, right, in that place. And that right there shows you the complicating, or the fact that time and circance make it very complex. Right?
Yes. Yeah, you're always adjusting to the environment you're in. Right.
And like your 401k, right? Your what you considered value at age 25, 35, 45, 55, and 65 is going to be very different.
Right.
Right. And
look, go back to the next practice. I did have some people say, are you sure you really want to start a collective of founder-driven firms in the middle of COVID? And my answer was, actually, this is probably the best time ever.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Because of the ability to work remotely and just have more time with people to talk, and it turned out to be accurate. But you could feel it because you're doing your homework and you can just see, So.
Bob, it's been a terrific conversation. Thank you so much.
I always enjoy talking with you, Mark, every time. And I never know where we're going to go, but it's always a fun conversation.